Well, hey, everybody, we're here today at Tweed Recording in Athens, Georgia, and I'm here with our friends Chris Rabold, Charlie Chastain, and Andrew Ratcliffe, and we're just here to just kind of talk about stuff in audio world and how we approach different aspects of things. We've kind of sort of dubbed ourselves now the newest members of the sort of medium handsome men.
The League of Medium Handsome
The
Men.
League of Medium
All the way
Handsome
from Oxford,
Men, just sitting
Mississippi.
around talking. So hopefully I'm not bringing down the curve too hard on that designation, but I'm glad you guys are here because I think whether you're a live engineer or a studio engineer, one of the key components of what we do is how we listen to stuff. I mean, we're all so concerned about individual inputs and pristine EQs or compressor settings or all that. But I think as we zoom out and sort of listen to music as we're building a mix, I just want to get from you guys, like what, as you think about how you listen and what you're listening for, how do you start to peel back the layers on that? Because sometimes a less experienced engineer or somebody who's just starting out really struggles with when they start combining things together in a mix, how to get separation, how to find clarity, how to get the key elements to speak the way they would want them to. And I think a lot of it has to do with just sort of how you listen intently and kind of peel those layers of the onion back in that process. So I thought it'd be fun just to spend a few minutes talking about that process, what we're thinking about as we're listening, what we're listening for. You know, before we even start twiddling knobs, it's like, okay, what is it about this sound that I really want to express as its essence? And how is that going to combine with everything else? So what do you guys think?
Wow, that's a big question. I guess for me, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was from a pretty prominent producer in New York City. I was an assistant engineer on for a recording session, and he told me with a thick Brooklyn accent that the key to a great song, in his opinion, was asses shaking and people humming along to the words. And
If they're dancing and they're singing, you're in the right place.
If you achieve both of those things, you're in the right. You're moving in the right direction. And I found the older I get and the longer that I do this, I'm less concerned about separation. Maybe at the beginning I was trying to separate too much and process too many things. And I've seen my workflows shift over time in that direction.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I think for me personally, I think it dictates kind of what type of music you're working on. I mean, if you're, for a studio perspective, you're working on a jazz record, then it's kind of this all-encompassing thing of, everybody in the room together, and there's bleed and things coming across one another. I mean, that's where I started. The studio that I started was, hey, let's get everybody in the room together and get weird and kind of see what happens with, things blending over one another. And then, for singer-songwriter stuff is the vocal. I mean, what that's the message. That's what's coming across. It's most important. So I think the song can help dictate that.
Yeah, that's really cool.
The
So
genre.
The genre and the song. And I love that idea of kind of capturing that feeling of people playing in the room together and being okay with not everything being super ISO'd and, being able to kind of take just the sound of this tom-tom and craft it, because it's getting bleed from everything else in the room. So how do you use that as a way to kind of see it as an additive component to other things that are going on?
Yeah, I remember distinctly for the first 3 or 4 years of running the studio. I mean, that's what we were doing with it because the space dictated. I mean, we had local bands and regional bands were all in the room together. So we didn't have the virtue and the accessibility to ISO things. So I remember the first record that I did where it was layered and we put the drums to a click track and layered everything. And it was really strange for me because I was like, well, where's everything coming across the microphone? So there's a lot of balance in that.
Interesting.
When you said that, you were saying what I was filling in the blank quickly with was, where's the hug? Like, where's the combining element of all of it, When you were speaking, it made me think about something that's constantly on my mind now. And it's, as I get older, I too watch myself change and I watch myself settle into patterns. But one of the hardest things to do for me oftentimes is to hear the song as music, not as a mix.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, there you go.
You know what I mean by that? Which is what you were alluding to early on. And the same thing with like, it's just, you know how it is. You start working on the hi-hat, next thing you know, it's lead hi-hat. You start working on the piano, it's lead, and then things just do this. And it's tough to kind of know what are the bounds, you know, where are we, or the boundaries rather, you know, where are we moving and working within. And then we did something yesterday, mix-wise, I don't know if you remember it, but at one point I said, okay, now we're going to do the most important thing there is. And I stepped back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stop
And
listen.
Right. And it's tough.
Yeah.
And it's hard. It's funny, I can disconnect in my car in a second and not listen critically. I just hear music. But when it's me and I'm touching this thing, something, then we're looking with pinpoint precision.
I can't do that anymore, man.
You can't help but hear.
I tell young people that we speak to about coming to school, it's like, okay, go home and listen to the song that you like least out of any other song, and listen to it every day for the next 8 days. It's like, I can go back and listen to the music of my youth and my dad, shoving Motown and Stax and all that in my head. But there came a point in time where I felt like I was in the studio and I was like, hey man, I'm getting pretty good at this. I get it. And now a song comes on. It's like, what mic's on the kick? What's the room like? Where was this recorded? And you just dissect it, like you said, over and over again. Where it's not pleasurable anymore. It's awful.
Yeah, it is a curse.
Yeah, and it's even worse when it's a track you worked on and it's on the radio.
Yeah.
And it comes on.
Now that's brutal, hearing your own work.
And
you hear
like,
all the flaws.
I hate that snare drum. What was I thinking?
Right.
Well, the problem is we've all been in a situation during a mix where it's like, this is never finished.
Oh, yeah.
You get a deadline and it's like, okay, this is where we're stopping.
Yeah.
But it's not finished. So when you get to that point where you're hearing it a month or two or 6 months later, you're going, yeah, it really wasn't finished, because I would make different choices right now.
Well, there's a really famous U2 quote where they asked that band, talking about albums, and they're like, songs are never finished. They're just released.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great perspective to have.
That's cool.
And that's something that I really appreciate about live sound, particularly knowing myself. I mean, I will work something until I can't stand anymore.
Yeah.
And with live sound, there is a finish line.
But the good thing is, you get a redo tomorrow night.
Well, and that's the thing.
It's over and done with and never comes back.
Yeah, it's kind of the best of both worlds,
Yeah.
because it's like, and that's always the thing, is like, well, you get to try again tomorrow.
Yeah.
If you're not happy with it.
Yeah, well, there have been countless times when I've thought in the middle of a set, okay, remind me, tomorrow I want to try this and just see how it works, because there is that opportunity for another at-bat, so to speak.
Totally.
But I love the idea of the difference between the mix and the music. I think if we can encourage young people especially to try to find the music in the mix, like what is the emotional moment? What is that we're trying to do to move people? So you mentioned, moving the asses and clapping the hands or whatever it is, singing along.
That's a fantastic metric.
Yeah. It's like, if I can look around the audience in a live setting, if I can look around and see people respond, it's great. If they're not responding, I've got to figure out why, because that's the whole point, right? Is to make them feel the music that the artist is intending.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, I think what we're talking about here is macro versus micro. You pull back and you want to hear the whole thing, but then you start focusing in on the hi-hat or any of the individual instruments, and it's so challenging. But that's exactly what we face when we have artists for revisions on mixes.
Oh yeah.
You're like, why are you trying to listen in a way that's opposite to the way your fans listen? Because when a fan pulls up a brand new track on Spotify or whatever, they're not going in with the intent of, I'm going to focus intently on the snare drum for the next 3.5 minutes. And but I mean, for us, it's really hard to do.
Yeah.
It's really hard to do.
I have a good friend, an engineer in Nashville, who was back and forth on a project one time between A&R and him as the engineer, and it was just, they were on revision 8 or 9 or 10. It was just this back and forth, and he was making meticulous notes of saving as he went, just to make sure that he could look back and see exactly what changed. So from the first submission to the final revision that ended up on the record, after all that back and forth, he said, what really changed was the snare was up about 0.5 dB.
That's just insane to me.
Because nobody did what you're saying. Nobody went, okay, let's just pause here and go, how does this make me feel?
Yeah.
Because you get so zoned in on a particular aspect that you can't hear the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
Well, that's the beautiful thing about, again, the metric that you mentioned
Yeah.
that was told to you or what you said. And I do the same thing in the live arena. I have my own, I kind of don't need anyone or even a visual to know where we are, whether I think it's good or not. But the deciding factor on how we're doing is when is looking around and seeing on an experiential level, how's everyone moving with it? Because what happens too is there's so many things in life where we feel like we have to do something. And that includes during the mix process, well, I feel like I have to have comments. And particularly now it's even worse with the recallability, they know.
Yeah.
They know you can get back to it way quick. Yeah. So it's like people feel like they have to have comments, or we feel like we have to keep picking at it. Whereas like you look at like a child when they listen to music, they're either digging it or they're not.
Yeah.
And the crowd that came there that night, for example, they're either having fun or they're not.
Yeah.
And it's like so simple to look at that, but that's the exact opposite of why we're there.
Well, and a lot of live engineers who are just starting out feel like they're not doing their job if they're not doing something.
Yeah.
So they're just constantly twiddling. Totally. And it's like, well, if I'm not twisting a knob or adjusting a fader, then somehow somebody's going to think I'm not doing my job. It's like, man, sometimes you just got to step back and sing along.
Yeah.
And just see how it feels as an audience member. Yep. I think that's a great tip.
I've had a number of acts that have sort of poked fun at me. And they'll be like, you look so bored out there. I'm like, if you see me doing this at the center section of the deck, that's the best thing you could hope for as my client. You know what I mean? Yeah. If I am frantically moving about, like that's actually not what you want to have happen.
Absolutely. That's funny.
But I'm guilty of it. I'll fidget and move. But hopefully it's small stuff that's being done,
So back to the original question, is there anything that you're thinking in terms of, so to get a little more micro, as you're approaching specific sources, are you making assumptions about what you're going to need to do or I'm just trying to get to if there's anything practical, like sonically for a snare drum or sonically for a vocal, here's sort of the way I'm going to try to dive in.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, for me personally, I didn't come from a background of beginning in the studio of having Pro Tools. I mean, it was all, started on a 4-track cassette machine into an ADAT machine into a Mackie. So it was very, outboard gear based and going, okay, well, I want to run this through this processing and I want to embrace the compression on the front end and go to tape that way or live that way and go, okay, well, this is what we're going to have on the back end and what I'm aiming for. And at the end of the night, we've told young people on Zoom calls and things like that, they get so wrapped around the mix. I mean, I specifically remember multiple times of being in the studio and finishing a song for the day and go, let's just drop it down to the master link just so we can have it for reference. And then a week and a half later, when the record's done, we're all sitting there mixing, and it's not a thing where you become married to the mix. It's like you go back to it. And
that's a great idea.
I loved having the conversation with Ken Scott about this, about the Bowie stuff and the George Harrison. It's like, those guys didn't do multiple takes. They did it one time because it was in the moment. So don't be scared to be in the moment and commit to it at the end of the night and say, we're all in this together.
Yeah.
Print it and leave it and come back to it, because a lot of times everybody in the room went, man, we can't beat that.
Because what you might think is a rough mix is pretty darn close.
It's the moment at 2 a.m. when everybody's there and they're on the same page. That sounds great. Let's leave it. So
that's cool.
But Andrew, I have 5 terabytes of space on the hard drive that I can fill with take 17 of the vocal.
What is it? McConaughey said that too many options will make a tyrant of us all.
Yeah.
Well, I've always thought, back in the days when we were recording a 2-inch tape, there was something about having to wait for tape to rewind and having to make conscious choices, because we had click on one track, Simpty on another track, so we were down to 22 tracks. Yep. You've got a 5-piece rhythm section in the room. What are we going to do? And so there's a guitar player during tape rewind going, okay, I got to really be selective about the part.
To the brain break, too.
The brain break, yeah. And to go, okay, I saw the piano player did this at the turnaround between the first chorus and the second verse, so I've got the next turnaround. So what are we going to do part-wise that complement each other? All that kind of stuff, playing as a band, it's a lost art in a lot of young people's minds because they don't have that limitation.
Yeah.
I can, to answer the question in a very unpoetic way, to be the lame-o that kind of gives you a nuts and bolts answer, When I'm in the midst of a mix, I do have a kind of a set of checks and balances, and that is headroom. Because as we start working on the individual elements, of course, I want each individual element to be the best that it can be, both on its own and cohesively, again, with the hug as the whole unit. But like on a just a numerical basis, we only have what we have.
Right.
Correct. Yeah.
So, I'm always really conscious as I'm building things of how it's adding, constructively and additively in the grand scheme of things, because you will end up, before you know it, with no more room to go.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how many more tricks you've got left, there's
Sure.
nothing left. So just for like an actual kind of nuts and bolts answer, headroom is something that I kind of keep an eye on. And I can be kind of artsy and in the moment and still go, I'm fine, or I need to pull it back.
Yeah.
So do you still have that same mentality of, say, if you know beforehand that what you're doing is going to be, put out in the world as a live record?
Yeah, I do, because I mix the same. And it's to be lazy is the way that I'm so regimented.
Yeah.
I mix the same way for everything all the time. And now in the digital era, it's grown to where I mix everything up to the tip top.
Yeah.
Almost this kind of pre-mastered sort of, not totally void of dynamics, but it is a modern thing. And so, yeah, no matter where it's going, and that's what helps me to I don't have to reinvent the wheel every time I do a mix for that reason. You know what I mean? Yeah.
No, I can agree with a lot of what you're saying. In Pro Tools world, I live and die by templates.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have templates, and when somebody hires me to mix, I'll bring in my buses. And yeah, you're right. I go ahead and get my drum bus feeling the way it normally does, hitting the processing in the way that it normally does.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my headroom for that, and then go from there. And yeah, I don't even probably think about feel until I get that technical stuff
Right.
in line.
Well, because like it's particularly with drums, where all the power is. If it's sitting in a safe spot, then you're just kind of you're just doing this, you know.
But if you weren't thinking about that, and then you were focused somewhere else, all of a sudden when you think everything's feeling good, you bring the drums up and you're like, nope, I hit that too hard, or I didn't hit it hard enough, or vice versa. So yeah,
that's what blows me away, where people don't have they don't have standards, and I mean that on a level, in terms of audio levels, okay?
Not the League of Medium Handsome.
absolutely not. A level of medium handsomeness.
There's a lot of people that would attack me personally with that comment. But as far as, your input meters, your output meters, your leveling, if you don't have standards, how do you know? It feels like you're just winging it every day, And that's why I'm a big proponent of kind of knowing your marks, knowing where you want to be, not to the point to where you make a decision based on a numerical value and not the aural value,
But the math does matter, especially in digital, and there is a sweet spot.
There is.
Right? And so mixing into that sweet spot.
And particularly, gosh, just looking at what sorry to interrupt, looking at what we're around here, this is the epitome of sweet spots.
Absolutely.
Right? All of these things here and they're all over the place.
Yeah.
The laws don't apply to the analog as much as
you get a little bit more forgiveness in analog.
Right.
But there is a limit. Like, tape compression sounds great, but everything clipping all the time may not sound all that awesome.
Yeah. I tell people, I tell them all the time as it pertains to metering, I'm like, pay attention to peak, because peak is the truth. Like, there's nothing past peak. Now I realize internally we can clip, but let's just, we all know what we're talking about here. You can't go, peak is peak. That's it. You're done. Yeah. Try to work and think in the realm of like RMS. How do I make that louder? Because I say, I'll say RMS is free, baby. Well, it's not free, but you can hang out
There's
in there.
a little more wiggle room.
You can.
Yeah.
After this, there's nothing left.
Yeah.
So there are rules. There are certain rules. Thank God there are. Talk about things never being done.
Yeah.
Not only would things never be done, they'd be infinitely loud.
But I thought about this one of the first times that I ran live sound, and talking about this again is that we have the luxury, unlike you do in the studio environment. I know you've been a part of this many times, where you're sitting there and you're trying to make it work and it's not working. You just go, you know what? Bring everything back down and just
start over.
Stop and walk away for a minute and come back to it. You can't do that when you got 100,000 people in the room.
Yeah, that's the beauty of the rehearsal period. Yeah, you can't. Although
frequency.
you will be surprised, and I've copped to this a lot. You will be surprised how many times if it's like it's a really dense mix, and I'm talking there are 60,000 people there, and my 3 guitars are bugging me, and I'll just mute them all for a second, and then unmute them and be like, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Or just, and I mean, because I'm like, you know what?
I knew it.
I'm not going to get fired.
There's 12
It's
Marshall
okay.
stacks.
I
on
got,
stage.
you know,
Just
and
go
it's,
to them.
you know, but like to just check real quick, I will literally mute something in the middle of a show. It depends on what kind of tour it is. If it's a show where the artist is listening to the board mix every night, of course I'm not doing that. But if I think I can get away with it, just to be like, I'm pretty sure I know what's mucking this up. Yep, it was that. Okay, cool. Here we go. You know, like everyone's still clapping.
awesome.
We're good. But I'll do it just
Yeah.
to check, you know.
Wow. So speaking of board mixes, so how do you guys, you're on the road, you're on the bus, and you get a text from the artist, listen to the board mix, and they've got some thoughts.
Notes.
How do you guys deal with that?
Most of the time, I think part of our job, especially in live sound, is to be sort of half musician, half technician, half therapist.
Mhm.
And so it's depending on, it's like 2 out of 3 every day, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes I'm a technician and a musician. Sometimes I'm a musician and a therapist, and any combination thereof. So I think some of it is just knowing, like, is this really, not to dismiss their issue, but how can I say, yes, I agree, or yes, I hear you, and let's listen to that together. Or if it's something like, no, there's a reason why this happened this way.
Mhm.
So sometimes it's, if there's a problem,
Yeah.
you're having to explain what may have happened. If it's just a preference or a taste
Yeah.
thing, then first of all, I hope that my board mix is actually a translation of what was in the PA.
Sure.
Like if I listen to the mix and I go, yeah, that's what I meant,
Okay.
then I can hopefully talk to them and explain. And if it's not what their vision was, then yeah, I'll listen and say, okay, I'll buy that, and I'll back that off or turn that up or whatever. But if it's constantly, if I hear from the guitar player every night,
But he wants more guitar.
more guitar, more guitar, more guitar, it's like,
Mhm.
well, the guitar is plenty loud in the PA.
Yeah.
You're not hearing it maybe from behind the PA, but man, everybody's engaging with what you're doing. And so we're not going to have a guitar solo mix. But how about you? What do you?
You know, it's interesting as you were answering, being in a educational environment, that is like, write that down. Obviously it made it to tape, because I'm not just saying that because we're sitting here. That's a near perfect answer on so many levels. And I guess the only one thing I would add to that is, I kind of I'll know my artist, and I'll know whether I need to be one step ahead of them.
Yeah.
And meaning like, and nowadays it's not so much board mixes, it's like Instagram
Or somebody's
yeah.
phone video
no.
that got posted to something, and they're hearing the PA
Yes.
through somebody's phone.
And that is
wow.
the honest to God truth. And it's so crazy that now as live mixers, it really is any mixer now. Same thing for studio stuff. I mean, it gets dumbed down to the phone.
Right.
Yeah.
It absolutely. So we're mixing in the, in the live realm. I've got 9 million speakers, 800 18-inch, subwoofers. I've got all this stuff,
Yep.
but I'm going to be judged on, more than likely, the result on someone's phone.
An Instagram video.
On an Instagram phone.
Yeah.
And I got to be honest with you, I usually come out okay on the Instagram level.
Yeah.
I really do. And if more times than not, it kind of does you favors, because it'll kind of clean up some of the mud or this and that. But, answering the question though, it's like, if I know the artist, if I know they're looking, I'm looking before they're looking,
Ah.
so I do.
Well, because management's looking.
And I know who's looking.
Yeah.
I know, plus I'll know if there was a weird moment or if there's this and that. And then, kind of just echoing your statements, it also depends on who it's coming from,
Right.
and is it someone crying wolf? Is it some artist that's just part of their sort of neurotic energy, is to pick, it's like the mix not ever being done. Is
Right.
to, like, they don't go to bed before they look at it and then wonder what happened and what went wrong, and then they expire.
Yeah.
And then they wake up the next day and everything's okay.
And for a lot of them, there's this insecurity of, well, why don't they like me? Why do they?
There's all that.
They're looking for those affirmations, and that's important.
It
because
is.
we have to acknowledge that is part of what made them an artist.
And I will tell you this: while that text nowadays might scare a lot of people, there is an enormous opportunity to build a relationship.
Oh yeah,
Sure.
If you're getting that, particularly not
100%.
from their people,
Right.
not from their management, not from the MD, not from the, but if you're getting it from the artists themselves, like it might be a little, depending on what it is, might be a little scary in the moment, but there's the opportunity to really take that somewhere.
That's very cool. So a lot of our audience is in the house of worship space.
Mhm.
So that comment and that thread directly translates to how their Facebook feed or their live stream is being perceived. So we can maybe take some time to address that in another sort of topic, another video. But for now, for this moment, I just thank you guys so much, because this is so helpful just to understand this sort of macro level of how we approach what we do, because it's so vital. We get so easily bogged down into tweezing the settings on a EQ or a compressor, and rarely do we have the sense just to step back and go, how's this feel? Because the people on stage, looks like it feels great to them because they're having a party.
Mm-hmm.
And the people around me, are they feeling it? Okay, good. We're okay.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing to freak out about, so we'll worry about tweezing our snare drum settings in our own time. But for now, we're going to sit back and enjoy the music.
Yeah, absolutely.